My ex-girlfriend wants to get back together, but she's had sex with like 5 guys while we were broken up. Our breakup was mutual, and I really miss her. Should I take her back?" It was supposed to be a harmless conversation, just 2 people catching up. That's what I told myself when I agreed to meet Emma for coffee that night. The air was crisp, and the little cafe on Main Street smelled like cinnamon and fresh pastries. I sat across from her, half listening to her talk about her new job, her roommate, some trip she wanted to take in the summer. But then, out of nowhere, she dropped a sentence that felt like someone had jammed a fist straight into my chest. "I should probably tell you," she said, casually stirring her latte. "I slept with someone on January 3rd. Just like that. No pause, no hesitation. As if she'd just told me she'd bought a new pair of shoes. The words didn't even register at first. My brain stalled like an old car in the middle of winter. I blinked at her, trying to catch up. January 3rd. The date stuck out in my mind like a flashing red light. My mind began working backward through the calendar, and I realized, with a sharp twist in my gut, that was barely a month after we broke up. I wish I could tell you I reacted with grace, that I took a deep breath, nodded, and wished her well. But in that moment, my mind went places I didn't want it to go. I saw her with someone else, laughing, touching, tangled up in ways that used to be mine. Every mental image made me feel sick. It's strange how a single sentence can drag you back months in time. Back to December 1st. Back to the night she walked out of my apartment with a half-empty duffel bag and red-rimmed eyes. We'd called it mutual. That was the polite version. The truth was, I wanted to fix things, and she wanted out. We'd been together for almost 3 years, and in my mind, couples worked through rough patches. But she said something that night that stuck with me. "We're not good for each other anymore, Matt. We're just tired." I remember standing in the doorway, watching her leave, trying to convince myself it was the right decision. We hugged awkwardly, and I told her to take care of herself. The second the door closed, I felt like I'd made the worst mistake of my life. The days after were quiet, painfully quiet. December was a blur of work, takeout dinners and late nights staring at the ceiling. She still had a few things at my place: a sweater, a pair of sneakers, some old books, but I didn't call her about them. I figured if she wanted them, she'd ask. For weeks, I told myself I was moving on, but the truth? I checked my phone every night before bed, half hoping for a message. My birthday came and went in early January. Friends took me out, bought me drinks, made bad jokes about how single life was going to be fun now. But the day after, I woke up feeling emptier than I had in weeks. And then, on January 15th, Emma reached out. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a simple, "Hey, how have you been?" over text. I stared at it for 10 minutes before responding. Our messages started light: weather, work, random memes, but little by little the walls started coming down. She asked about my family, my plans, if I'd been seeing anyone. I told her no. She didn't comment on that, but I could tell she was curious. Which brings me back to the cafe. We'd been talking for maybe 40 minutes when she leaned back in her chair, smirking just a little, and dropped that line. "I slept with someone on January 3rd. I gripped my coffee mug a little tighter. My brain spun. January 3rd was a Tuesday. She'd been gone barely 33 days. I remembered how I'd spent that night: leftover pizza, an old movie, pretending I didn't miss her. And she was clearly doing something else entirely. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at the table, trying to stop the tidal wave of emotion that was crashing through me. Hurt, anger, disgust, confusion, it all mixed together until I didn't know which one was going to win. In my head, I fought 2 battles. One side wanted to throw her words back at her, to make her feel the same sharp sting she'd just given me, to say something cruel, to tell her she'd just confirmed every fear I had about why she left. The other side of me, the part that wasn't running on pure adrenaline, was trying to stay calm. It's reminding me that on January 3rd, she wasn't my girlfriend anymore. Reminding me that I had no claim to her life after December 1st. That second voice was quiet, though. Almost too quiet to hear over the roaring in my ears. "I see," I finally said, forcing my tone to stay flat. She shrugged, almost as if to say, "What did you expect? Oh, maybe she was right. Maybe I should have expected it." But that didn't mean I was prepared for how it would feel to hear it out loud. I asked her why she felt the need to tell me. She said something about being honest and not wanting me to hear it from someone else. That only made my stomach twist more. How many people knew? Was this something she'd shared with friends, laughing about it over drinks? The mental images kept coming, uninvited and relentless. Her with him touching her the way I used to. Her smiling in that way I thought was just for me. Every detail my imagination filled in made it worse. I excused myself to the restroom, not because I needed to go, but because I needed 30 seconds to breathe without her eyes on me. I stood at the sink, gripping the cold porcelain, staring at my own reflection. My face was pale, jaw tight. I asked myself the question I didn't want to answer. Was this betrayal? Or was it just something I couldn't control? We weren't together. She hadn't cheated. She hadn't broken any rules. But my heart didn't care about technicalities. It just knew it had been kicked. When I came back to the table, I decided I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. We wrapped up the conversation, made some half-hearted comments about keeping in touch, and went our separate ways. Walking back to my car, I realized something important. I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't unhear her words or erase the pictures my mind had painted. But I could decide what came next. And maybe, just maybe, the first step was accepting that sometimes the worst pain doesn't come from betrayal. It comes from the things you had no control over at all. The morning after Madison's confession felt strangely different from the night before. Evan woke up expecting the same crushing weight in his chest, the same gnawing replay of her words. But instead, there was a quiet, like the moment after. A storm when the rain has stopped, but the ground is still wet. His mind wasn't empty. Far from it. The memory of her voice, calm and matter-of-fact, telling him she'd slept with someone else, still flickered in his thoughts. But something about the way the sun came through his blinds that morning, warm and almost forgiving, made him realize he had a choice. He could either let that moment define the rest of their story, or decide it was just one page in a book that wasn't finished yet. His first instinct was to go into over-analysis mode, the way he always did. He played the words back in his head, searching for cracks, looking for signs of guilt, regret, or even pride in her tone. But no matter how many times he dissected it, he kept coming back to the same point. They weren't together then. December 1st had been the day they'd ended things. It had been mutual, at least on paper, though both of them had walked away carrying unspoken feelings like heavy bags they weren't ready to unpack. Whatever happened after that was technically outside the bounds of what they'd promised each other. That was the anchor he kept trying to cling to. This wasn't cheating. There was no betrayal of a promise because there was no promise at the time. It wasn't about morality, it was about reality. And in reality, she had done something she was free to do. His logical side understood that. His emotional side still bristled, still recoiled at the thought of her with someone else. But logic was the only thread keeping him from unraveling completely. Still, logic alone wasn't enough. He needed to put it into perspective. He thought about the difference between hookup sex and the kind of connection they shared. He'd never been the type to pretend feelings didn't matter. For him, intimacy was built brick by brick, through years of laughter, hard talks, shared silences, and late-night drives with no destination. The idea of Madison with someone else didn't sting because of the physical act. It stung because he knew that person couldn't possibly touch the depth of what they had. Hookup sex was like striking a match, hot, fast, and gone in an instant. What they had was a slow-burning fire, the kind that kept you warm through winters. It was almost ironic. He knew about her past. It's the relationships she'd had before him, and it had never bothered him. Maybe because those were in a time before them, before he knew the way she laughed when she was nervous, or how she always ordered sweet tea no matter where they went. But now, the thought of her with someone else, after everything they'd shared, hit differently. And yet, when he forced himself to strip away the jealousy, What was left was a simple truth. It didn't erase what they'd built. That thought made him remember how it all began. They hadn't been one of those whirlwind romances where you fall hard in a week and burn out just as quickly. They'd been friends first, real friends, the kind who could talk about absolutely nothing for hours and still not want to hang up the phone. The shift from friendship to love had been gradual, almost sneaky. One day he realized he cared if she texted him back right away, and that he noticed when she laughed a little harder at his jokes. By the time they admitted their feelings, they already knew each other's flaws and still wanted in. That was rare. That was why, no matter how much her confessions stung, he couldn't write her off as just another ex who hurt him. If he was honest with himself, he also knew he wasn't innocent of causing pain either. Relationships were two-way streets, and he'd made mistakes. Times he'd been stubborn, careless with his words, too wrapped up in his own head to notice when she needed more from him. Maybe that was part of the reason they'd broken up in the first place. So if he could forgive himself for being imperfect, maybe he could find it in himself to forgive her for something that happened when they weren't even together. That was the moment he decided he needed a mental reset button, the kind you slam down when your brain is on a loop, replaying scenes you don't want to see. He couldn't keep imagining what happened between her and that guy. It was poison. Every time the image popped into his head, he'd tell himself, hit it better. Then the last, it became his shield, a way of reminding himself that the only thing that mattered now was what he brought to the table. If he was going to let her back into his life, it had to be with the mindset that he was building something stronger than before. Not standing in the ruins of what used to be, he knew it wouldn't be perfect. Pain doesn't vanish just because you decide it should. But pain, he realized, was like an uninvited guest. You could either let it take over your living room, or you could open the door and let it leave when it was ready. He wasn't going to pretend it didn't hurt. He wasn't going to plaster on fake positivity and act like everything was fine, but he was going to choose how much space that hurt took up in his life. There was a kind of quiet power in that decision. It wasn't about being naive or blindly optimistic. It was about acknowledging that love was always going to come with risk. And that holding on to pain like a badge of honor didn't make you stronger, it just made you tired. Madison had made a choice in January, and now he was making his in March. He could keep replaying that night in his head, dissecting every syllable. Or he could focus on the moments ahead, the ones he actually had the power to shape. By the end of the week, Evan noticed something unexpected. The memory of her confession still stung, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It was more like a scar than an open wound, there, but no longer bleeding. He started to see their recent conversations differently, focusing less on what had happened between them and more on what was happening now. There was laughter again, little inside jokes slipping back into their talks. There were moments when she'd say his name in that soft way she used to more, and for a second, he'd forget there had ever been someone else in the picture. He knew better than to think it would be easy. Rebuilding trust wasn't about erasing the past, it was about proving the present could be stronger. He was willing to try, but not in a desperate, cling-to-what-we-had kind of way. It was more like standing on new ground and deciding whether they could build something worth protecting. He didn't know how it would turn out. He just knew he didn't want to walk away wondering if they could have made it. And so, when he thought about the choice in front of him, it came down to something simple. The pain was real, but so was the love. He could let one outweigh the other, or he could see if they could exist side by side until, maybe one day, the loved one. That night, lying in bed, he realized he'd stopped replaying the January scene in his head. For the first time since she told him, he didn't feel the need to measure himself against someone he'd never met. All that mattered was whether he could look at Madison and still see the woman he fell for, not just the one who hurt him. And as strange as it felt, he knew he still could. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to follow and subscribe for more of these stories. We have also handpicked 2 more stories that we believe you will enjoy watching. Enjoy.